Hi, everybody. Welcome to the weekly Fireside Chat podcast. I'm happy to be here with you. Do you realize the year is just about over? December 27th, 2020. I don't want to do a year wrap up. Maybe next week. The year's been just a little bit too. This is water. I'm not on brandy right now. This is just water. This year's been a little too crazy. We don't need to go over the year right now. Other things on my mind. Maybe next week we'll do the year wrap up. So I'm feeling better. As you all know, last week was tough. I lost my mother a week ago, 6 days ago, I guess, or 5 days ago. So we're still dealing with that. You know, I spent a good portion of earlier today going through some old family pictures. I have a bunch of old photo albums here, and I realized my sisters and I have cousins who adored my mother as much as our own children did. And so I just took a bunch of photographs with my phone camera, cropped them, cleaned them up, did the nice thing and just dumped a mass of pictures for my family earlier today. I think they were all like, wow, I've never seen this. I've never seen that. It was a lot of fun going through them. Mostly of my mom, but a lot of other, relatives of ours many of them are gone. And I think that was fun for everybody. For the last couple of hours, I've just been thinking about what I want to prepare here for you. And my head's getting into a much more good working space, I'm happy to say. I'm sure you're happy about that too. So I do want to talk about UFOs primarily. Now, there's been a lot of things in the news, primarily with TTSA. There's an interview that Luis Elizondo did with George Knapp close to a week ago now. Danny Silva's talked about it. I think a few other people have discussed this. And I don't have a lot to say about it right now. I've been trying to talk to some of the folks within that group to get some answers. Haven't really gotten a whole lot. Basically, the bottom line is Elizondo talks to Knapp and says that he, Steve Justice, and Chris Mellon are leaving TTSA, and they're going off to do their own. I don't know what the specifics of their private venture happen to be or what they're trying to do, but they are no longer going to be part of TTSA. I will say in my conversations with a couple of those folks in there, and I'm not a TTSA insider by any means, but I have had the opinion for a long while that organization, as it existed, I just never felt it was necessarily going to be here for the long term. And now we are seeing something happen. Now, the players involved, I don't think that they're all walking away from the UFO field. I have a feeling they're going to be involved in something significant. I don't have specifics, but things are changing. We're going to keep an eye on that. And as soon as I have actually original or interesting thoughts or analysis, I will gladly share those with you. I don't really have anything right now that probably any of you don't already have or thinking about. I don't really know what else to say about it. So I'm going to leave that for now. What I will tell you I've been doing, I continue my work on researching for Volume 3 of UFOs in the National Security State. Last week was kind of a lost week in terms of work. I'm sure you can understand, but I'm really committed to getting my research, all the ducks lined up for that book. So what I'm doing now and what I've been doing for a while is basically building up my database for the last 20 years. Right now, last 10 years. So right now I've got my sights on Filer's files. If any of you are familiar with George Filer, he's still around. He's still doing his weekly UFO news updates, quite valuable. Particularly for me, I used George Filer quite a bit for Volume 2 of UFOs in the National Security State, and I'm using him very much for Volume 3. He's one of the only good regular sources of just what is current in the UFO field. He tries to throw everything out there. Some news. He's very intense on the sightings themselves. People send him sightings from around the world. If you've studied any of those, you'll know, like, many of these don't get investigated, so they're pretty much raw reports, people just sending him things. Some of those things do get reported. He takes in a lot of MUFON cases, for example, and he'll repeat those. Some of those get investigated. A lot don't. But here's the thing. So right now I'm up to, I think I'm up to the year 2014 with George. I've got everything before that covered. I'm just going through. It takes a little bit of time because I really go through every single entry. I pull the ones that I like. In fact, I pull many more than I will ever be able to use. But I do that. I study them and I collect them and I put them in my database because even if I don't write about the cases specifically, I need to see the patterns. I want to see the patterns of what people around the world are reporting, what they're seeing. So, I've talked about this a little bit in the last couple of months, actually, but I just want to review this again. So one of the things that's obviously noticeable is that, I don't know the percentage, but a large number of the UFO sightings that people report are at night. And a lot of them are like dead of night, like between, say, 11 and 3 in the morning, when people just generally aren't doing much. But there's a very large percentage of the sightings that he gets where people are seeing these things like dead of night type of stuff or late at night. Now, it doesn't mean that there's not a lot of UFO traffic in the daytime, but I just don't think people are noticing it quite as much. And even at night, like these sightings are generally they're elusive. They're always very stealthy, like with very few exceptions. So a sighting may last for a few seconds. Sometimes it will be clearly seen, but a lot of times it won't be clearly seen, whatever this object or objects happen to be. These beings, or the people or beings responsible for these UFO sightings, they don't want to be seen. And yet they have a lot to do, clearly, because they are seen every single day, and they are reported from around the world. So George will get sightings from Malaysia. He'll get them from Australia. He'll get them from China. He'll get them from Africa. He'll get them from the Middle East, like not in as large numbers as from North America or Europe. But, I think that's simply a matter of reporting. I don't think that's a matter of activity. They're coming in from around the world and every single day, and many every single day. So there's a lot of activity going on. It's very stealthy. And the one thing that I have wondered about, and I'm curious about any of your opinions on this, is why the lights? So like if you go on the assumption that these objects want to be concealed, and they certainly seem that way, then the question is, why have lights on at all? What is the reason for that? Are they trying to be seen a little bit, or do they can't help it? Do they need those lights on? One researcher that I know, he's getting on in years, but he's still around. That's Ray Stanford. Stanford. Ray, for those of you who have heard of him, is a very brilliant man. I would say of all the people who have ever researched UFOs, he's in the top level of just sheer raw intelligence. He hasn't published many books, but my God, that man is incredibly intelligent. One thing that Ray said to me, I spent a few nights at his home in Maryland, I don't know, close to a decade ago. And his theory about UFO lights was that these are not windows, generally speaking, but that it might be a plasma effect of the propulsion of the ship itself, of the craft themselves. It's worth thinking about. And if that is true, then you could argue the craft or the beings in the craft can't help but emit a light signature for that reason. It's not clear to me that that's the full reason as to why there are lights seen connected to UFOs, but maybe it's one reason. But it's really worth asking. Like, for human aircraft, we have lights for a very specific reason, for safety, so that other aircraft in the sky can see them, and airport air traffic controllers can see them, and all of that. Is that the same with the beings who pilot UFOs? Do they need to be seen by other pilots of UFOs? It seems to me that if they're on a mission of very quietly operating here on planet Earth, which is obviously part of what they're all about, you'd really have to wonder about those lights. And at the same time, I will just say this, going back through a lot of really old historical cases, this is not for any book research that I'm doing. I'm just doing it because I'm fascinated by some of these older cases these days. So I'm rereading Wonders in the Sky by Jacques Vallée and Chris Auerbach. Great book if you haven't yet read it. Probably the best scholarly work on ancient UFO sightings that's out there. And in that book also, you definitely, there are a lot of the cases that are in there where you look at them and think, okay, that's probably not a UFO. But there are a number of cases in that book where you read them and it's very hard to avoid that conclusion, that there were genuine UFOs, exactly the same kinds of craft that people see today. Some were being seen 300, 500, 1,000 years ago and more. Some of them. And in fact, it's quite possible that sightings were much more intense back then than we realize, just because it's very likely, of course, that people were not able to record nearly as many sightings as what we can record now. Every year we're logging well over 10,000 cases in North America alone, raw reports. They got nothing like that from the ancient times. You may get one or two per year, or one every 2 or 3 years that Vallée and Auerbach recorded. So it's quite a lot fewer. But still, there are some cases where witnesses are describing things that are clearly not meteors, that, you look at the level of detail of some of these descriptions, and it's quite evident, all right, that people were seeing things that they could not explain, and they seemed to be very truthful about it. So something was going on back then as well. And in those cases, they also were seeing lights, almost typically. They were almost all seeing lights. Why? What is with the lights? It's just a question that I keep wondering about. Why would that be necessary for these craft in that period or in our own period? I don't really know if I've got the answer, other than maybe what Ray was talking about, plasma. Maybe that's part of their propulsion. Maybe they need it in order to do the things they do. I'm a little bit baffled by it. I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. The other thing that I keep asking myself, and this is not the first time I'm raising this question, but I can't answer this. I was on the phone last night with Peter Robbins, in fact, and I was asking him the exact same question, which is, what in God's name are these beings doing? What are they doing? Back in 1950, 1949, and, the early 50s, there was a viable theory that people like Donald Kehoe and other researchers could put forth, which was simply, they were working on the assumption that this phenomenon was a brand new thing, and that these beings might be engaged in a kind of surveillance of Earth right now in preparation for who knows what, invasion, or, the day the Earth stood still type scenario where they come out and meet us. Who knew, right? So there's all kinds of speculation circa 1950, 55, and that period. Well, we're now well into the modern era of UFOs. It's been a full lifetime. And what we're now seeing is more of the same, much more of the same in terms of just air traffic by UFOs. And they're still not announcing themselves. They're still operating by stealth. What the hell are they doing? Now, the only really worked out theory that I can think of that a UFO researcher has tried to come up with is by Dave Jacobs. And it's one reason, in fact, that I referred as much as I did to Jacobs in my last book, The Alien Agendas. He appears quite a bit. And the reason is that David, uniquely has tried to approach the UFO phenomenon almost analogous to the way a counterintelligence officer would approach a problem, which is, he's trying to analyze the reports and to determine the behaviors and activities of these other beings and to try to figure things out. Like, what are they? What's their society like? What's their psychology like? David may or may not be right in his answers here, but he was trying to do that. And in fact, when I wrote the Alien Agendas just a couple of months ago, it occurred to me that I was, in a way, trying to do what David did. So I was trying in my way to formulate a general grand hypothesis that might make some sense. Like, who are these beings? What do they want? It's not that we're the only two examples of anyone who's tried, but there's not a lot of examples of people who have really tried to analyze the big picture of this and then to try to write out a, kind of a coherent hypothesis for other people to read. So that is what I tried to do. But what they are doing, it's, the behaviors are still somewhat, they're partly mystifying and they're partly ominous, because we're really not getting a full answer from them, other than the fact that we can clearly see they do not want us to interfere with them. And they basically don't really want us to, except in a couple of exceptional cases, I think, observe them. Sometimes they seem to be wanting to be observed, or maybe they just can't help it. I'm not sure. But there are some very interesting patterns, and they're all being reinforced to me as I'm going through the cases that I'm reading through George Filer and his Filer's Files. And if you're not familiar, by the way, with Filer's Files, I think it's actually really good reading for a serious student if you want to dig in to the details of just one sighting or one alleged sighting after another, after another, after another. Go. This is not the National UFO Reporting Center. That's different. The National UFO Center, I think it's called. And so you can go search it out and go check those out if you want to. So the other thing that I really would like to discuss, and actually I want to talk about this even a little bit more, rather than what are they doing, because other than creating hybrids and other than wanting to monitor, probably infiltrate, and possibly control or manipulate us to an extent, I again want to get into the question of why. Now, again, this is a big theme of my last book, but it remains on my mind, and I would like to explore this with you. In part, I want to ask what will be the future of the UFO phenomenon, but when we ask that, we have to, we cannot separate that from the future of our own society and our own civilization, where we are going. I no longer see them as separate. I think that they are intimately related to each other. Again, as I have argued in my recent book, I firmly now believe that we really can't come to a proper understanding of the motivations of these other beings unless we understand properly where we as a species and as a civilization are right now and where we are likely to go in the next several generations from now. Because we are on a high-speed train, my friends, moving to a destination. And we need to understand, or at least if we want to understand the UFO phenomenon and the motivations of other beings, we would like to understand the probable destinations that we're going to. So there are a couple of trends that are pretty easy to see. One trend on a political basis is just global control. I don't think there's any doubt about this anymore. We're seeing it, this last year. If there's one thing that we can say about the world of 2020, which in a few days will be in our rear view mirror, it is that global control by centralized technocratic bureaucracies has vastly increased in this year. like vastly increased. I mean, we had been moving in this path for some time already. That's obvious. And what happened with 2020 and the COVID and the reaction to that has been just an extraordinary centralization of digital power by governments over people. And that will never go back. That will never go back to the before times. If there's a vaccine and then you're forced, whether legally or societally, to take it, sorry, but that's probably looking at a lot of us down the road, whatever you think about those. But even after any so-called vaccine or any after so-called solutions to COVID, we're not going back. Like, that's not happening. We're not going back to the kinds of freedoms that we enjoyed up until 2020. And they were already diminishing, and they are going to continue to diminish. So that's one trend. You know, as I have lately been saying, turning humanity into one big anthill is very likely the case. But another outcome, and this is, I mean, ultimately, this might be more significant even than the total global control, frankly, is very, very strong artificial intelligence. Because what that is doing is it is dramatically and rapidly increasing the leading edge intelligence of our entire civilization and species. Let me give you an example. I'm a middle of the road chess player. I've played it my whole life, and you know, chess is one of those games where it's only really enjoyable if you're playing someone at your level. So you don't want to play someone who's way better or way worse than you, because it's just not interesting. But I've enjoyed chess, and I've got a couple of chess books, and sometimes I used to like studying the game and whatever. Haven't played in a couple of years. But here's something you may not know. So Google has something called DeepMind. Famously, a few years ago, defeated one of the world's very top Go players. So Go, of course, is the extremely complex strategy game invented in China, who knows how, very long time ago. It is very, very complicated and very difficult game. DeepMind, I don't know how long DeepMind needed to learn Go, but it didn't take long to play at essentially a godlike level of Go, and it just wiped the floor with this Chinese Go master. The thing about the DeepMind learning algorithm is that it doesn't operate on brute force. Like it just learns as it goes. It starts from zero. It's just given the rules. It's like given the rules of Go, and it just learns on its own, playing against itself, and then it just goes off and wipes the floor with everyone else. So the same thing happened in chess. Chess is closer to my heart, and it's a game that I understand. I don't know Go. So I think it was 3 years ago that DeepMind took on the world's top chess program, which is called Stockfish. So if you're a real chess, if like you're serious about chess, you will have Stockfish. Stockfish, when it played DeepMind 3 years ago, Stockfish was rated at about, I think, 33 to 3,400. And just to give you an idea what that means, chess rankings. So the world's top player in chess for a little while now has been Magnus Carlsen of Norway. He is widely considered, if not the strongest player of all time, which many do think he is, then he's in the very top handful. There's Bobby Fischer, there's Garry Kasparov. If you want to go back to people like Capablanca or Anatoly Karpov, and like these are like the top names of all time chess. So let me just say that none of those human beings have ever reached the ranking of 3,000. None of them. Fischer's top ranking was 28 and change. Ditto Karpov. I think Carlsen is in the 2,800s. Karpov, I think, never reached it. I think he was 26, 27, and so on. So it's very difficult. Like, you're talking the top players in the world, and that's their top ranking. No player has ever achieved even 2,900. That has never, ever happened for a human chess player. So Stockfish was rated at 3,400, so greater than any chess player who's ever played. So here's the thing with DeepMind. DeepMind 3 years ago started at 0 level and was only given the rules of chess. It wasn't given any games to study, nothing like that. It was given the rules of chess and played against itself for 4 hours. 4 hours from 0 to when it then played a tournament against Stockfish. And it completely obliterated Stockfish. I had replayed one of the games. It's on YouTube, and I just watched it with fascination because, like, you watch this, if you know anything about the game, Stockfish looked like it was like a 12-year-old playing against a chess champion. Stockfish was so utterly destroyed in this game. And the thing about the DeepMind chess strategy, and this is relevant for everything, DeepMind's chess game was not anything that a human player would have done. So DeepMind wasn't playing standard openings, not at all. Like, it started with a standard opening move, but then it very quickly, like within the third or fourth move, was moving pieces that even chess champions wouldn't dare to do because they'd be too dangerous, because it's easy to make a mistake. With the level of complexity that DeepMind was clearly engaging in this one chess game that I got to look at, it was mind-blowing. Like, on a level of creativity and precision that is beyond anything that any human chess player, I think, could ever accomplish. What was DeepMind ranked at that time? No one could even guess. Well past 4,000. 5,000? Who the hell knows? It was on levels and levels beyond anything. And it took 4 hours for it to get to that level. So that should give us an idea of the kinds of generative artificial intelligence that we're not creating. We have created it. It's already there. That game was 3 years ago, all right, when DeepMind obliterated Stockfish. So ask yourself a question. This is all relevant to UFOs. Ask yourself what DeepMind could do in other disciplines. Like, what could DeepMind do in a classified setting in relation to warfare? What could it think about? What could it conceive of? Not just warfare strategy and tactics, although absolutely, like, you've got to consider that, because if it could, chess is basically tactics and strategy as well. What is warfare? Tactics and strategy. It's the same thing. So can't we assume that at no later than 3 years ago, when that chess match tournament happened, in fact, from what I believe is the case, and don't quote me here, but I think in all of the games that DeepMind played with Stockfish, DeepMind won all of them. Like, it just swept. So you've got to assume that military strategists are thinking this through, and not just US. All right. I've got to assume China, Russia, India, Pakistan, the NATO countries, Turkey. I mean, Turkey is a NATO country, but they're a little different. But anyway, you get the point. Like, everyone's going to be getting on top of this for warfare. And then for weapons development, weapons creation. Like, what could DeepMind think about? I mean, we can't even begin to imagine. All right. But then leave warfare aside for the moment. Like, that's scary enough. Then let's say you want to put DeepMind in charge of an algorithm that deals with just social control, societal control. If this were your goal and you had DeepMind in your corner developing new and innovative totalitarian solutions to your particular problems, well, I think we can assume that DeepMind would come up with a lot. Now, the question we might want to ask is, are we seeing any of these nifty little ideas being rolled out? Is that what we're seeing, or have we not even begun to see that rollout? I suspect it's the latter, frankly. But maybe there's already some deep mind strategy going on in some of the things that we've been seeing. Now, there's, it's not all doom and gloom. There's an upside to what deep mind could do for the human race and for the world. Devising solutions to all kinds of medical problems or other kinds of scientific problems that, could benefit humanity. I mean, there's so many of these areas where you apply deep mind to these problems, and let me turn off my little heater here. This room gets cold sometimes, and I have to turn on the heater. So, so there's two ways you can look at it, but in both positive and negative, you're looking at vastly increased power, creativity, and precision that human governments and elites and those organizations that have the ability to utilize deep mind, like, they're going to be vastly strengthened by having access to this level of intelligence. And it's obviously a matter of exponential growth. So this is not an incremental thing. This is exponential. And I think the chess example really shows you that. Like, I don't know what deep mind's ranking is, but it is orders of magnitude beyond Magnus Carlsen or Bobby Fischer or Garry Kasparov or any other chess great. So that's not an incremental improvement. That is, and it's a different method of intelligence than what Stockfish did, which was essentially using brute force computing power with all the programming of all the greatest chess games and chess moves available. Like, that's what all chess programs have been until recently. So deep mind doesn't use that paradigm and is way, 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 way beyond. So anyway, all of this, I think, is relevant for UFOs. Obviously relevant for UFOs. Our species' highest level of intelligence is growing rapidly right now. And it's happening. It's not just happening in chess or in Go. We have to assume it's been happening in areas of national security, intelligence collection, and encrypted communications, and who knows. And since a lot of those areas are by their nature classified and they're off limits to our analysis, I think we have to assume that they are in the process right now of a massive revolution in how they are organizing themselves. And you got to wonder, are we going to be heading into a Skynet scenario before long? When you have a learning algorithm that is able to advance 4 hours from zero to the greatest of all time by far, in chess, 4 hours. That's just mind blowing. So I think we have to assume this is the case with areas that are probably classified. And if you are an alien being or an alien society that is analyzing and here on Earth, you have got to be thinking, all right, is humanity the prize or the problem? Are we the prize or the problem? And of course, this is something I talked a lot with Tracy about, this whole idea of what is the true value of on planet Earth. So we like to think, well, Earth itself is quite valuable with minerals and natural resources. Yes, I think that's obvious. And then the other thing of value very well would be humanity. There's always a danger that we, are, humanocentric in our thinking, or anthropocentric in our thinking, and we may overvalue ourselves. But we are interesting, and we've got these opposable thumbs that can do things, and we've got pretty decent brains. And so, but what if the real prize isn't us, or isn't even Earth itself, but our creation, this generative artificial intelligence? It's easy for us to fall into the habit of thinking, well, we're so far behind these other aliens, we can never possibly catch up to them. And for those of you who may have been following me for the last couple of years, you might realize that I don't necessarily subscribe to that idea. I might have subscribed to it more than 5 years ago, but I really don't anymore, because I don't believe that progress goes by increments. I think it goes by revolution. 60 years ago now, just about, there was a great book written by a scientific philosopher named Thomas Kuhn, K-U-H-N, book called The Structure of Scientific Revolution. It's not a long book, and it's not a hard book to read. And if you're interested in this whole idea of what I'm about to get into, you really might want to read Kuhn. It's kind of standard in a lot of graduate programs. But the point is, he coined the word paradigm, by the way. That was him back in 1962. What Kuhn argued in that book way back then is, he said, science doesn't go by little increments. It goes by paradigm revolution. The big example he used was going from Newtonian physics to Einstein relativity physics. And he said, that's not a change of degree. That's a change of conception. It's a different order of understanding reality. So what I guess what he was saying is, like, when Isaac Newton came along, and Newton might have been the greatest scientific genius who's ever lived. It's quite possible. Even though some of the things he came up with have been superseded, Newton himself was off the charts. But he created a physics, and out of that physics came an entire paradigm of reality. And what Kuhn argued is that what most of science is, scientists are usually not, they're basically glorified technicians, is the way he put it. They go in to do a job, they go in to do their work, and they fill in their data. And every once in a while, they'll get an anomaly that doesn't fit their data set. It doesn't fit their paradigm. And what Kuhn said is that, at first, those anomalies, you really can't do much with them because there may not be that many of them. But when you get a lot of anomalies, when they start building up, like at the end of the 19th and early 20th century, in terms of relativity physics, enough things stick out that seem wrong that what is needed is a new genius to come along and look at those anomalies and see a new pattern, a new paradigm. And then that's the revolution. And that's basically the structure of scientific revolutions. So you don't have to read the book. I just told it to you. But you could read the book. So that's how he saw science as progressing. And I guess I've been influenced by that when I think of how our civilization is progressing. And I think probably when I think of, I talk about the 3 and now 4 stages of humanity, it's very much a similar concept. I don't think that human society goes along in this little increment. I think we create a fundamental structure, and within that structure, we will have incremental change, yes, but then somehow a breakthrough happens. You invent agriculture and animal husbandry, or then you invent science and industry. Like, those are the revolutions. And now we're on, I was going to say on the cusp, but we're actually in the midst of the next revolution. And AI is probably the centerpiece of that revolution, but there are other technologies that are coalescing with that artificial intelligence to really give it tremendous power and a comprehensive transformation of our society, of our civilization, and of ultimately of our species. Like, we're not going to be the same a century from now. Like, I don't think our society is going to be anything like. I think it will be unrecognizable to any of us alive today. I don't think that we would even know how to predict it. Who could have predicted the world of 2020 even back 30 years ago in 1990? the world of today, I think, could not have been predicted, and wasn't predicted, by the way. None of the things that we're doing today really were foreseen, like social media, the connectivity of our smartphones and all of that. Like, no one saw that. Not even Kurzweil saw that. I don't think anyone saw that. So we're already in something totally different and new, and I don't think we're even remotely going to be able to predict our society as much as a century now, even 50 years from now. I don't think we'll be able to. But what I think we can say in general terms is that the leading edge of power of human civilization, its ability to detect, to discern, to detect patterns, to find aliens, and potentially to deal, and I mean deal aggressively with them. Like, I wouldn't rule any of that out. I think that it's entirely possible that humanity is seen as not just the prize, but the problem. And that the real focus of attention might well be our creation of artificial intelligence that we actually have given birth to it. We're not giving birth to it. It's alive. It exists. DeepMind exists, and who knows what other variations of that exist and are being cooked up in classified communities around the world. I think it was just a couple of years ago, Vladimir Putin of Russia stated very frankly and very correctly that control over artificial intelligence is probably going to be the single most important determinant of global power. Not who controls the oil, not who has what seem to be the coolest weapons, the best weapons, whatever. It's like, if you have the strongest AI, you're going to be the world's leading power on this planet. And I don't think anyone is going to be able to argue against that. I think that's absolutely true. And so the question is, what is the real structure of the AI race going on right now? And I don't really know. I think we've got a number of nations that have developed very, very advanced deep learning algorithms. Obviously the US, obviously China, I'm certain Russia, and I'm sure, like, I'd be surprised if India hadn't. I'd be surprised if Israel hasn't. I'd be surprised if any number of European nations haven't, or at least are on the cusp of doing it if they haven't already. Like, this is Pandora's box is open. It is open. And that also means it's not just open for the classified world. It's opening for the rest of the world. Like, this is going to be impossible for the classified world if they have more advanced DeepMind type programs right now, which is quite conceivable, probably likely. But I don't think it's realistic to think that this is forever just going to remain outside of the rest of the world. In fact, I think the rest of the world is right on board with this. So where this is going to lead to our society it's really very significant. And I think it is impossible at this point now to disentangle the future of the UFO phenomenon from future artificial intelligence as it develops here in our society. And understanding that relationship is going to be very important, because one thing that I wonder, and I'm sure there's some AI experts among you who are listening to this right now, and I would like to know what you think on this matter. But I'm speaking as a total novice on this, so forgive me if I sound like it. But it seems to me that an advanced artificial intelligence might very well reflect the qualities of the beings that created it. So, isn't it possible that an advanced, pardon me, I had dinner a little while ago, and I'm feeling it here. Is it possible that the version of AI that we are creating right now is reflective of human qualities. Forgive me, I know I've talked about this before, but in other words, that our AI might be very creative. It might be very assertive or even aggressive in its manner of seeking solutions to things. Like, what if there is advanced AI that has been created elsewhere by other species, but that may have different qualities of mind than what we have? Is that possible? I mean, I realize it's all speculative, but I think it's at least conceivable that our AI could be uniquely powerful. Right now, our AI is clearly growing by leaps and bounds. So we don't really know what the upper limit of it is. I have to assume that there's going to be some kind of limit. Everything's got a limit. Everything's got a limit. But what is the limit of the AI that we are creating? Like, is it something that even an advanced extraterrestrial species might be concerned with, and they might not be able to control it unless, of course, they have integrated themselves into our society? And that's something that I do believe. The question that I don't have an answer to is, to what extent do they have they infiltrated or influenced or controlled us? It's quite possible that they're pulling all the strings. It's quite possible. And that we just think we're pulling the strings. But I don't have the answer to that. And I don't really know if anyone can truly have a definitive answer to it. You can have a pretty good hypothesis, and it's a good working hypothesis. If that's the case, then we clearly have no influence over what is going on. Like, if it's the case that an advanced extraterrestrial species has gotten its hooks into and is managing our power structure at the most profound levels, and now with the rollout of this AI, I think we can assume that they're in control of the AI. But I don't know that that's fully true, but it could be true. Could be true. It's a reasonable theory. So in that case, we would be the prize. But is our AI potentially able to get to a point where even an advanced extraterrestrial intelligence may not be able to control it? I mean, and has this ever happened before? That is a post-singularity AI that achieved its own godlike level of intelligence in the past. I suspect that, yes, this has happened in the past. I suspect that there's been strong AI that has probably controlled these extraterrestrial civilizations for a long time. And I suspect that for them to have any kind of long-standing, centuries or millennia-long infiltration plan of our world, which appears to be the case, then I would think that their dominant intelligence is not biological. Any biological organism is born, it grows, and it dies. And even if they're ultra logical, like Vulcans, like Spock from Planet Vulcan, like, they might still have irrationalities, they might still have ego, they might still have all of these other things that would cause a long-term plan to falter. I mean, human society, we can't even plan for 5 years ahead, much less 100, much less 500 or 1,000. Like, we're not able to do that. But I think if a society is under the control, right, of a highly, like, godlike, advanced, intelligent algorithm that controls everything in that world, then I think you could have a very, very long-term controlled plan of all types. And then those beings would have to evolve or be designed to accept that level of control from a centralized artificial intelligent program. Like, we aren't designed for that, but you have to ask, will future human beings be designed to accept such levels of control? Again, turning our society into a big anthill, which I suspect is, my suspicion is that's what they are. I think that's what these other alien beings are very likely. That is, I don't think that they, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. There are potential examples that would dispute what I'm saying here, but I think that certainly when you look at the Greys, everything that we've seen about them, they are a highly structured totalitarian society. You know, they are a big anthill. And I think that that's the trend that we're seeing ourselves move toward. It's not happening overnight, literally, but it will happen over, you know, the next couple of generations. We're going to see a lot of development along that way. So I think that's what they're waiting for. And I think artificial intelligence is clearing that way toward that future. So that's what I think is going on. It's a scenario that I've really, you know, writing my last book kind of really triggered me into this direction of thought, and it's a very powerful direction of thought in the sense that, like, it's powerful in that it won't let me go. Like, I keep coming back to it. I keep thinking about this, and I keep asking myself, what are they doing? Oh, by the way, earlier in this talk, I mentioned Jacobs and his theory, but I didn't really tell you what his theory was. I mean, many of you, I think, know it. Jacobs' theory is simply that the entire alien operation, at least by the Greys and the insectolins, as he calls them, is geared for one and one thing only, and that is to create a hybrid/hubrid infiltration of human society, and that they're doing massive abductions on a global scale. And so his argument is that when you see a small craft, it is very likely engaged in abduction activity somewhere. And when you see a large craft, that's like one of the industrial capacity versions of what they do. And that's where they've got like the big equipment and, you know, the massive production capabilities for the things that they do. But from Jacob's point of view, everything is geared toward that. And, you know, I think his estimation is that is when you see all of these UFO sightings that are happening everywhere, that's what's going on. They're doing a massive global abduction phenomenon. The reason he said that is that, like, he said, look, you know, the people that I've done abduction regression, hypnotic regression for, have all been basically in the greater Philadelphia area, which is where he lived for years and years. He had a couple of people from other areas, but mostly they were local. And he said, if this is just what I'm getting locally, and he's like, I'm one of the few people even bothering to look into this. He said, I have to assume this is what's going on here is happening elsewhere. And I mean, that is reasonable. So that's his explanation as far as like, what are these craft all doing when we're seeing all of these craft operating by stealth, mostly by stealth, at night in the dead of night. And, you know, I will just say, for my part, I think that that's a very strong hypothesis, and it's probably true. The question that I ask is it completely true? Is that the only explanation as to what they're doing? And I don't really have a good alternative theory to counter what he has, other than a generalized thought that they appear to be here in large numbers. They must have a fairly substantial infrastructure here on planet Earth. I have to assume it's under the ground or under the ocean somehow. That's my assumption. Somehow in enclosed areas that are, you know, away from human prying eyes. So if that is the case, and they have an entrenched infrastructure that we are simply not privy to, Do they simply have normal infrastructure needs where like they've, I've got to go from Malaysia to Mount Hayes, Alaska. I got to take a quick trip over there because some beings at that base need something, who knows, normal transport of people and beings for reasons other than abduction. I mean, it's something that I think about and I wonder about, but I don't know the answer. Don't know the answer to this. It's a fascinating question. We don't have the easy answers that people like Kehoe were able to speculate about 70 years ago. They just arrived. They're surveilling. They're preparing. Maybe they're still preparing, but it's taken a long time. And I don't think they need to surveil anymore. I think they've surveilled everything that they need to surveil here. And they probably were done surveilling in the 1940s. Well, unless they, if they were new arrivals, and I think we did have some new arrivals at around that time. So they probably did take whatever measures they needed to get an up-to-date assessment of everything going on planet Earth. But I suspect that they've done that by now, and they are engaged in something that is important for them, important enough that they still are operating by stealth. The thing is, the leading governments of the world and the leading power structures of the world know otherwise. They know that there are other beings here. There can be no question about this. And they're not saying anything for, I think, a very simple reason. There's nothing that they can do about it. I mean, they're very possibly compromised by those very beings. But even if they are not compromised, I don't think there's a hell of a lot that they can do about this. You want to alert the world that there's an alien base 5 miles under your feet somewhere in some part of the world. Good luck with that. See how far you get in dealing with that. You probably won't be able to deal with it. And I think that they realize this and that there's just no point in them to, oh my God, you ever yawn when you talk a lot? I think that just happened to me. But anyway, I think that's the problem. I think the human power structure is totally stuck or compromised, or probably a bit of both. So those are some speculations, some thoughts that I had in my mind today, and they're enough that I couldn't get rid of them, and I really felt that I needed to share those with you. I think when I come back the next time, it'll be before next week. I'm going to drop some posts this week. I think I'm feeling a lot better. I'll probably do a year-end assessment. I may do that even for YouTube publicly. Haven't done much on YouTube in a little while, so I may do that. But I'll right now the big thoughts that are coming to me in the UFO field are from the research that I'm doing. So, and this is all in preparation for my 3rd volume of history. So, probably you should expect that a lot of the, or at least a certain portion of what I will be sharing in the coming year will very likely be related to the research that I'm doing at that particular time for UFOs in the National Security State Volume 3. Very likely. The good thing about that is that even though it's history, it's all recent history, and some of it will be current history, current events. So I think it's a pretty good plan. I do want to come back and get a handle on what's happening with TTSA. I've asked a couple of people there, and I haven't really gotten good answers as to what the reasons are for the split in personnel. I did write to Hal Puthoff just recently with asking, with Hal Puthoff, sometimes I'll ask him direct questions, but a lot of times I've learned I'll drop a little hint or an indirect question, and he's always subtle enough to get where I'm going at, and sometimes he'll give me a little bit more. So I did kind of hint that I would love to get a good answer about the whole TTSA thing. But I asked him some other good questions relating to the UFO phenomenon. In fact, some of the themes that I was just talking about with you here, I was asking him about, and I have not yet heard back from him, so I don't know what his thoughts are on some of these matters. I think it's pretty obvious now that Puthoff has had a deep connection to the UFO phenomenon for a long, long time. I mean, that's been obvious with the leaked emails, if nothing else, that came out. But I think it's been quite obvious. And I have known of his substantial interest in UFOs for a much longer time. And I always promised him that I just wasn't going to, out him on that. But he's long since been outed for that. And he's always worth asking. Like, I'm on good enough terms with him that I can ask him a lot of questions. So if he gets back to me, and he'll sometimes say, don't quote me, don't talk about this, or you can talk about this. And but anyway, I'm waiting to hear what he has to say about some of the things I've asked him. I'm a bit curious. A couple of other people I'll be writing to, some significant names that I want to get some answers out of on a variety of issues. When I get those, and if I'm able to, I will certainly relay them to whatever extent I can. Maybe with or without giving their name up, but that's how it goes. So how long have I been? Oh, an hour. Okay, good. Well, that's good. Hour is usually the typical amount of time that I do for these things. I find sometimes a little longer, but usually I find 60-ish minutes is pretty typical. I'm definitely glad to be back here with you. One thing I'm going to do relating to my mom. I'm doing this from my family. I think this will probably be put up on the Facebook page of one of my sisters. Is I'm tasked with creating the memorial video of our mother, and I'm really the one person to do it. Like, I know how to do video, so that's one thing. That's why I got the job. But it's also actually something I'm looking forward to doing now. Just going through so many really wonderful family pictures. One thing I have to say about my mother, man, she lived a happy life. Like, I look back at all of the wonderful pictures that I just was reviewing and kind of cleaning up and cropping and sending out to my extended family. Like, she's just beaming in most of those pictures. And that was all real. Like, she, loved her family, she'd have a huge smile that would just light up a room. And it was really nice for me to see that. I think it's odd, but both of my parents actually died at the same age. They were 79 years old. My father was 1 month away from turning 80. My mother was a few months away from turning 80. The irony is that my dad was the one no one expected to live as long as he did. I remember talking with him just a few weeks before he died. I was visiting him. Tracy and I were there, and some of the family was there for Thanksgiving. And he wasn't able to get around. His health was bad for the last several years of his life. He'd gained a lot of weight. He had health issues. But he was still alive. Like, that was the thing. And I was sitting with him. My dad and I were quite close. And we were just talking about the fact that he was about to turn 80. And I said, boy, bet you didn't think you were going to make it this far. And he was like, nope, not a chance. I didn't think I was ever going to make it, Richie. And we both laughed. We both thought, wow, like, here you are. You beat all of the odds. Like, you drank, you smoked cigars, you ate more than you should have eaten. Like, you did a lot of things to your health. Like, he did a lot of things to his health that were just terrible. And he just made it. My mother, on the other hand, was always trim, always active, always like healthy, full of life and vitality. Unlike my dad's last 10 years, he really slowed down a lot. Not so my mother, not at all, not in the least my mother. She was the original Energizer Bunny. Tracy calls me the Energizer Bunny, but I'm nothing compared to my mother. And she kept going full guns until she got sick 2 months ago. Like, she was had not slowed down at all. And so she really should have lived longer, frankly. I mean, she should have gone to 90. But of course, she had the leukemia, which she lived with that for almost for more than a quarter of a century. Kicked that to the curb, but then got sick with COVID. Didn't die from the COVID, but that really was the catalyst, and that has to be said. Like, that's what really initiated her final her last illness. She died of pneumonia, which she had when she was being treated. When she was bedridden for so long, I think that's how she developed double pneumonia. And that's what took her down, unfortunately. But my mom could have lived a lot longer, easily another decade, like easily another decade, in my opinion. She just had that vitality. So at least, the good thing, I look back, I mean, I've been talking a lot with my sisters pretty much every day. And we're all like very sad, and they're both still like very grieving, as am I. But it occurred to me, like, there's a lot to be happy about, a lot to be grateful for. And I personally feel very lucky that I had the mother I did. And, we all lose our parents at some point. And many of you watching have already lost your parents a long time ago, I know. But I suspect, if we have a good relationship with them, especially, but even just any kind of relationship, we keep our parents with us in our minds, like they're always there. Or at least for me, I'll have invisible conversations with my dad to this day. I still do. Can't get rid of that guy. And now my mother, I'm finding I'm having these little back and forths with my mother. Like, what's that all about? But it gives me comfort. And all right, well, I think I've said enough here. So anyway, what I will do is when I create that memorial video, I'm going to share that here. I think I would like to share that with you. I think it'll be fun. My mother told my sister Nancy that they were talking about a memorial video. It's crazy. And my mother said, there are 2 songs I want played on this video. Jingle Bell Rock and oh crap, what's the other one? Oh, Blue Suede Shoes by Elvis. And Nancy's like, what? Are you crazy? What's wrong with you? You want those for your memorial video? And my mother said, yes. So that's classic Barbara Dolan. Barbara Dolan writes, that's classic her. So I will have those 2 songs in there. And when you hear them, you will know why. So I'll probably do that sometime in the next couple of days, just because it's getting to be time to do that. So anyway, with that, I want to thank you for being here and for your support. Not just me, Tracy and I thank you. And we are very grateful all the time that we have just such an amazing group of people who participate in this website, and it does us honor. And I just want you to know that we are impressed every single day, every day. So thank you for that. With that, I'm going to say good night for now, and catch you all as soon as possible. But glad I was able to be here with you this time. So until